The announcement came right after the pumpkin pie, when the whole family was gathered around Grandpa's mahogany dining table. 32 people spread across 4 generations, all stuffed with turkey and waiting for the traditional post-dinner stories about the good old days, when Grandpa built his construction empire from nothing. Instead, Grandpa stood up slowly, using his cane for support, and cleared his throat for attention. "Before we all get too comfortable," he said, his voice still commanding despite his 87 years, "I have something important to announce. I've been thinking a lot about the future, about legacy, about making sure this family is taken care of when I'm gone." A hush fell over the room. Everyone knew that Grandpa's estate was substantial. The construction company, multiple properties, investments accumulated over 6 decades of hard work. The unspoken assumption had always been that I would inherit the bulk of it, being his eldest grandchild and the one who'd worked alongside him in the business for the past 8 years. "I've made a decision about my will," Grandpa continued, looking directly at me. "Sarah, I know you've always expected to inherit the family business and the estate." I nodded, feeling suddenly nervous about where this was heading. "But I've been watching this family and I've realized that you don't need my money. You've got your own life figured out, your own success. You're independent, capable, strong." Murmurs rippled around the table. My cousin Michael, sitting across from me, was leaning forward with obvious interest. Michael, on the other hand, has been struggling. His restaurant failed last year, he's got 3 kids to support, and Jennifer just lost her job at the bank. They need help in a way that Sarah doesn't. My stomach dropped as I realized what was coming. "So I've decided to change my will. The business, the house, the investments, all of it is going to Michael and his family. They need it more, and I believe they'll use it wisely to build a better future for their children." The silence that followed was deafening. I could feel 31 pairs of eyes turning to look at me, waiting for my reaction to having my expected inheritance stripped away in front of the entire family. Michael's face had gone bright red. "Grandpa, I don't know what to say. Are you sure about this?" "I'm absolutely sure. You've got a family to think about, bills to pay, a future to secure. Sarah's doing fine on her own." I looked around the table at faces that ranged from shocked to sympathetic to smugly satisfied. My cousin Jennifer looked like she was about to cry with relief. Uncle Robert was nodding approvingly. Aunt Patricia had her hand over her mouth in surprise. Everyone was waiting for me to react. To argue, to cry, to demand an explanation, to make a scene that would be talked about at family gatherings for years to come. Instead, I stood up calmly, walked over to Michael and extended my hand. "Congratulations, Michael. I hope it serves your family well." Michael shook my hand uncertainly. "Sarah, thank you for being so understanding. I know this must be hard." "Not at all. Grandpa's right, you need it more than I do." I turned to Grandpa and gave him a hug. "I love you, Grandpa. I hope you enjoy the rest of your Thanksgiving." Then I picked up my purse, said goodbye to the room in general, and walked out of the house I'd expected to inherit someday. As I drove home to my apartment, I couldn't help but smile. If only they knew the truth about who really needed whom in this family. The truth was, Grandpa hadn't been supporting himself for the past 3 years. His construction company had been hemorrhaging money since the 2019 recession, his medical bills had skyrocketed after his heart surgery, and his investments had been liquidated one by one to cover his expenses. The truth was, I'd been quietly paying for everything through a trust fund I'd established in 2021. Grandpa's mortgage, his medical bills, his household expenses, even the lavish Thanksgiving dinner we'd just finished, all of it had been coming out of my account for 36 months. The business that Michael thought he was inheriting? It was $2.3 million in debt and facing bankruptcy within 6 months. The house had a $400,000 mortgage that was 3 months behind on payments. The investments had been cashed out 2 years ago to pay for Grandpa's cancer treatments. What Michael was actually inheriting was a beautiful illusion that I'd been funding with my own money to preserve Grandpa's dignity and keep the family from falling apart. The irony was almost poetic. Grandpa had just given away my inheritance to someone who needed it more, not knowing that the only reason there was an inheritance to give away was because I'd been secretly providing it all along. It had started 3 years ago when Grandpa called me in a panic. The construction business was failing, his savings were depleted, and he was facing foreclosure on the family home that had been in our family for 40 years. "Sarah, I don't know what to do," he'd said, his voice shaking in a way I'd never heard before. "I've never asked for help from anyone, but I'm about to lose everything your grandmother and I built together. That's when I'd made the decision that would change everything. I'd recently sold my digital marketing agency for $12 million, and while the family knew I'd had some business success, they had no idea about the scale of my wealth. I'd been deliberately modest about my lifestyle, driving a 10-year-old car and living in a simple apartment, because I valued privacy and didn't want to change family dynamics. Grandpa, what if I told you that you don't have to worry about money anymore? What if I could take care of everything? Sarah, honey, I can't ask you to. You're not asking. I'm offering. Let me set up a trust fund that covers all your expenses. You keep your dignity, the family keeps their peace of mind, and you can focus on your health instead of worrying about bills. That conversation had led to the creation of the Harrison Family Support Trust, which had been quietly paying for Grandpa's entire lifestyle ever since. The trust covered his mortgage, medical expenses, utilities, groceries, car payments, insurance premiums, and even the generous Christmas gifts he gave to all the grandchildren every year. The family had no idea that Grandpa's money was actually my money. They still saw him as the successful patriarch who'd built a construction empire and was graciously sharing his wealth with his descendants. They had no clue that the empire had crumbled years ago and that everything they associated with his success was being funded by the granddaughter they saw as just doing okay for herself. The construction company that Michael was so excited to inherit? I'd been covering its payroll, rent, equipment costs, and outstanding debts for 3 years. The employees thought they were working for a stable family business when they were actually working for a company that existed solely because I was subsidizing its operations. The beautiful family home where we just had Thanksgiving dinner? I'd been making the mortgage payments since 2021, plus covering property taxes, insurance, maintenance, and utilities. Michael thought he was inheriting a valuable asset when he was actually inheriting a money pit that would require constant financial support. Even Grandpa's medical care, which had enabled him to live independently and maintain his commanding presence in the family, was being paid for by insurance policies and medical trusts that I'd established and funded. 2 days after Thanksgiving, I got a call from Marcus Torres, the attorney who managed the Harrison Family Support Trust. Sarah, I saw the news about your grandfather changing his will. How do you want to handle the trust moving forward? What do you mean? Well, if Michael is inheriting everything, presumably he'll be taking over responsibility for your grandfather's expenses. Should we start transitioning the trust payments to him? I thought about that for a moment. Michael and Jennifer were drowning in debt from his failed restaurant and her recent unemployment. They were about to inherit what they thought was a fortune but was actually a massive financial liability. If I suddenly stopped funding Grandpa's lifestyle, they'd discover within weeks that their inheritance was worthless. Let's give it a month, I said. I want to see how things play out. That month turned out to be very educational. Michael immediately started making plans for his inheritance. He put his current house on the market, assuming he'd be moving into Grandpa's much larger home. He started shopping for a new car to replace his aging minivan. Jennifer began looking at private schools for their kids, figuring they'd finally be able to afford better education. Meanwhile, the bills kept coming in and Michael kept forwarding them to Grandpa, assuming the old man would handle them as he always had. Except Grandpa had never actually been handling them. I had been. By December 15th, 3 weeks after Thanksgiving, Michael called me in a panic. Sarah, I need to ask you something and please don't take this the wrong way. Do you know anything about Grandpa's finances? What do you mean? I mean, I've been trying to understand his accounts and nothing makes sense. The construction company books show massive losses for the past 3 years. The house has a huge mortgage that should have been paid off decades ago. His medical bills are enormous, but I can't figure out how he's been paying them. Have you asked Grandpa about it? I tried, but he gets confused when I ask specific questions about money. Sometimes he seems sharp as ever, but when it comes to finances, he just tells me that everything's taken care of, and changes the subject. I could have explained everything right then. I could have told Michael about the trust fund and offered to continue supporting Grandpa's lifestyle indefinitely. I had more than enough money to keep funding the illusion forever. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the memory of sitting at that Thanksgiving table while Grandpa explained that I didn't need his money because I was already successful. Maybe it was the assumption that I would be fine with losing my inheritance because I was independent and capable. Or maybe it was the realization that the family had been perfectly happy to let me pay for everything as long as they didn't know about it, but would probably react very differently if they knew the truth. Michael, I'm sure Grandpa has everything organized. He's been managing his finances for 60 years. But Sarah, the numbers don't add up. The construction company hasn't made a profit since 2019. The medical bills alone should have bankrupted him. How is he paying for that big house, the new car, the expensive medical treatments? I really don't know. Maybe he has investments you haven't found yet. I've been through everything with his accountant. There are no investments. There's barely any money at all. It's like someone else has been paying his bills, but that's impossible. 3 days later, the mortgage company called Michael directly. Grandpa's house payment was 60 days overdue, and they needed immediate payment to avoid foreclosure proceedings. That same day, the construction company's landlord called to say the business was 4 months behind on rent and would be evicted unless they received payment within 48 hours. Michael called me again, this time clearly panicked. Sarah, I think Grandpa is in serious financial trouble. The house is about to be foreclosed on, the business is being evicted, and I can't figure out how any of this happened. He seems so stable, so secure. That does sound concerning. Have you talked to the rest of the family? I tried, but nobody knows anything. Dad thinks Grandpa has been living off his construction company profits. Mom assumed his investments were covering everything. Everyone just took it for granted that he was financially secure. What are you going to do? I don't know. Jennifer and I barely have enough money to cover our own bills. We can't take on Grandpa's expenses, especially not when we're still trying to understand how big those expenses are. Maybe you should talk to Grandpa directly? I tried again yesterday. He just kept saying that someone would take care of it, that there was a plan in place, but he couldn't remember the details. I felt a pang of guilt about Grandpa's confusion. He wasn't lying or trying to hide anything. He genuinely didn't understand the financial arrangements because I deliberately kept them simple for him. All he knew was that his bills got paid somehow, and he'd been trusting that the somehow would continue indefinitely. On December 20th, exactly 4 weeks after Thanksgiving, I got a call from Grandpa himself. Sarah, honey, I need to talk to you about something important. Of course, Grandpa. What's on your mind? I'm confused about my money situation. Michael keeps asking me questions I can't answer, and I'm starting to worry that I made a mistake about something. What kind of mistake? About changing my will. Michael seems to think he's inheriting a lot of money, but I'm not sure that's true anymore. I'm not even sure I have a lot of money to leave anyone. Grandpa, are you okay? You sound worried. I am worried. I keep getting calls about bills that need to be paid, but I can't remember how I usually pay them. There's something about a trust fund that takes care of things, but I can't remember who set it up or how it works. My heart broke a little listening to him struggle with the confusion I'd inadvertently created by trying to protect him. Grandpa, would you like me to come over and help you sort through your paperwork? Would you? That would be such a relief. I hate feeling like I don't understand my own finances. That afternoon, I drove to Grandpa's house for the first time since Thanksgiving. When he opened the door, he looked older and more frail than I'd ever seen him. Sarah, thank God you're here. I've been so worried about everything. We sat down in his study, surrounded by piles of bills, bank statements, and legal documents that Michael had obviously been going through. Grandpa, I need to tell you something, and I hope you won't be upset with me.
What is it, honey? 3 years ago, when you were having financial troubles, I set up a trust fund to help you. The Harrison Family Support Trust has been paying for your house, your medical bills, your business expenses, everything. He stared at me for a long moment. You've been paying for everything? Yes. Your construction company has been losing money for years, but I've been covering the losses so you could keep it running. Your house payments, your medical treatments, even your car, it's all been coming from the trust fund I established. But that must cost about $40,000 a month. It's been $1.4 million over the past 3 years. Grandpa's eyes filled with tears. Sarah, why didn't you tell me? Because I knew you'd be embarrassed. I knew you'd try to refuse help. I wanted you to maintain your dignity and your independence. But the family thinks I'm wealthy. They think I'm leaving Michael a fortune. I know. And technically, you are leaving him everything you own. It's just that what you own isn't what anyone thinks it is. What do you mean? I pulled out the trust documents and explained the situation. The construction company that Michael was inheriting had $2.3 million in debts and no assets. The house had a $400,000 mortgage. The car had an outstanding loan balance. Even the furniture and household goods were being paid for through financing agreements. So Michael is actually inheriting debt, not wealth? Unless someone continues funding the trust, yes. Everything will collapse within a few months. Grandpa leaned back in his chair, looking devastated. I've made a terrible mistake. I gave away your inheritance and gave Michael a bunch of debt he can't handle. Grandpa, it's okay. I never needed your money. I was just happy to help you keep your independence. But it's not okay. I made assumptions about your situation without knowing the facts. I thought you were just getting by while Michael was struggling, when the truth was the opposite. The truth is more complicated than that. Michael is struggling financially, but he's also struggling because he made some poor business decisions. I've been successful, but I've also been deliberately modest about that success. What do you mean? I took a deep breath and decided it was time for complete honesty. Grandpa, when I sold my digital marketing agency 3 years ago, I made $12 million. I've since invested that money and built a portfolio worth about $30 million. I don't need your inheritance because I have more money than I could spend in several lifetimes. He stared at me in shock. $30 million? Yes. I've been living modestly because I value privacy and I didn't want money to change how the family treated me. But the result is that everyone underestimated my financial situation. Including me. Especially you. And that's okay because it allowed me to help you without making you feel like charity. We talked for 2 more hours, going through every aspect of his financial situation and discussing options for the future. By the end of the conversation, we developed a plan that would preserve his dignity while being honest with the family about the reality of the situation. The next day, Grandpa called a family meeting for December 23rd, 2 days before Christmas. He asked everyone to come to his house for what he described as important news about the family's future. When everyone gathered in the living room, Grandpa stood up with more confidence than he'd shown in weeks. I need to tell you all something important about my will and about the family finances. 3 weeks ago, I announced that I was leaving everything to Michael because he needed it more than Sarah. Michael nodded uncomfortably. Grandpa, we've been talking about that. Let me finish. I made that decision based on assumptions that were completely wrong. I assumed that Sarah was just getting by financially while Michael was struggling. The truth is much more complicated. He gestured for me to join him at the front of the room. Sarah, would you please explain to the family what you've been doing for the past 3 years? I looked around at the familiar faces, some confused, some worried, some clearly dreading whatever revelation was coming. 3 years ago, Grandpa's construction business was failing and he was facing financial ruin. I established a trust fund called the Harrison Family Support Trust that has been paying for all of his expenses since 2021. Uncle Robert leaned forward. What kind of expenses? All of them. His mortgage, medical bills, business expenses, utilities, car payments, insurance, household expenses. Everything you associate with Grandpa's comfortable lifestyle has been funded by the trust. The room was completely silent. How much money are we talking about? Aunt Patricia asked. About $40,000 per month. $1.4 million over the past 3 years. Michael's face had gone white. But that means... It means the inheritance you think you're getting doesn't actually exist. The construction company is $2.3 million in debt. The house has a $400,000 mortgage. Without the trust fund, everything will collapse within months. Jennifer started crying. So we're not inheriting anything? You're inheriting exactly what Grandpa owns, which is a collection of assets and debts that net out to essentially nothing. Uncle Robert stood up angrily. This is ridiculous. Sarah, are you telling us that you've been manipulating the family finances for 3 years? I'm telling you that I've been preventing Grandpa from losing his home and his business while maintaining his dignity and independence. But you let us all believe he was wealthy. I let you believe what you wanted to believe. Nobody ever asked me about Grandpa's finances. You all just assumed he was fine because that's what you wanted to assume. Mom finally spoke up. Sarah, honey, why didn't you tell us what you were doing? Because I knew what would happen. You'd either try to stop me or you'd start treating Grandpa like a charity case. I wanted him to maintain his role as the family patriarch. But now Michael thinks he's inheriting a fortune that doesn't exist, Jennifer said. Actually, Grandpa interjected, I'm changing my will again. Since Sarah has been supporting me for 3 years, it makes sense for her to inherit everything, including the responsibility for the trust fund. Wait, Michael said, I don't want to inherit debt. If Sarah wants to take back the inheritance, that's fine with me. I smiled. Actually, I have a different proposal. I pulled out a folder I'd prepared with Marcus's help. I'm offering to forgive all of the construction company's debts, pay off the mortgage on this house, and establish individual trust funds for all of Grandpa's grandchildren, including Michael's kids. The room erupted in surprised murmurs. The total cost would be about $8 million, which I can easily afford. In exchange, the construction company would be restructured as a family business owned equally by all the grandchildren, with professional management to ensure it's profitable going forward. You're offering to give us $8 million? Michael asked incredulously. I'm offering to clean up the family's financial situation and establish a sustainable foundation for the future. But there are conditions. What conditions? Uncle Robert asked suspiciously. First, complete financial transparency going forward. No more secrets, no more assumptions, no more letting pride prevent honest conversations about money. Everyone nodded. Second, the construction company operates as a real business with professional oversight. No more family members getting paid for jobs they're not actually doing. A few people looked uncomfortable, but they nodded. And third, we establish a family foundation for charitable giving. Part of being wealthy is being responsible with that wealth. Sarah, Grandpa said, his eyes shining with pride, that's the most generous offer I've ever heard. It's not generosity, Grandpa. It's family. But it's family based on honesty and mutual respect, not assumptions and secrets. 6 months later, the transformation was remarkable. The construction company was profitable for the first time in 5 years under professional management. Grandpa was living comfortably in his paid-off home with full-time care assistants that I was happy to provide. Michael had used his trust fund to start a new restaurant that was actually succeeding this time, with proper business planning and financial oversight. Most importantly, the family dynamics had completely changed. Instead of assumptions and financial anxiety, we had open communication and mutual support. Instead of competition for Grandpa's approval and inheritance, we had collaboration on family business decisions and charitable projects. The Harrison Family Foundation had awarded its first grants to local charities, and everyone felt proud to be part of something larger than themselves. At Christmas dinner, Grandpa made a toast that summed up everything perfectly. This year, I learned that the most valuable inheritance you can leave your family isn't money, it's the knowledge that they can trust each other, support each other, and be honest with each other no matter what. He looked directly at me. Sarah, you gave me the greatest gift possible. You let me keep my dignity while taking care of my needs. But more than that, you showed this entire family what it means to love someone without expecting anything in return. Sometimes the best way to handle losing your inheritance is to realize that the most valuable things in life, love, respect, family unity, can't actually be inherited. They have to be earned, nurtured, and freely given. And sometimes, if you're very fortunate, the process of almost losing those things helps everyone involved understand how precious they really are.